Thanks a lot. So I'm really happy to be here for several reasons. One of which is that I've been in my bed for the past 6 days with cold and flu. So hoping my voice gets through this and that I make it. So bear with me. So we're talking today about food and more specifically food inequality and what I like to call reclaiming local food systems. Food inequality is a pretty diverse and complex issue, and I'm certainly not going to solve it for you today, even though that's what it says right there. But I'm going to hopefully touch on some things that I think can make a big difference. So even before I was a farmer, I was pretty involved in food. In fact, I've been eating food since the day I was born. And as a kid, I wanted to be a chef. I kind of went through that period. And when I was 13, I became a pretty militant vegetarian and animal rights activist. So I was kind of involved in food topics through those years of my life. And eventually, I became a reformed vegetarian and embraced the world of meat and hunting. And so throughout every period of my life, I've been sort of involved in different aspects of food. And it wasn't until about 10 years ago that I got involved in gardening and farming and kind of went that route. Present day, I work for an organization called the Horn Farm Center for Agricultural Education. And we're a nonprofit organization based in York County, about 25 minutes from here in Hellam Township. And we do a number of different things. And this year is our 10th anniversary as an organization. I haven't been involved since day one. I've been involved there for about 6 years, 3 of those years as a volunteer, and then the past 3 as an employee. And currently, I was the farm manager. My position changed recently, so I'm now the Incubator Farms project manager, and I'll talk a little bit more about what that means in a bit. We have 189 acres, and different types of farming are happening on all that. The land that we have has been farmed continuously since colonial days, so 200 plus years of farming have gone on that land. And the long story short on the history of the Horn Farm is that 189 acres at one point, which the land is currently owned by the county and has been all along. So at one point the county decided they were going to lease out that land to some organizations that were interested in developing it for manufacturing, some other things, and a grassroots organization in the township decided they wanted to see this historical farmland kept that way. So they fought back, got petitions, and went through the process and won. And so the county said, you may use the land, but we'd like to see you do something worthwhile with it. And that's how the Education Center was formed. We have a couple different aspects in our organization that we focus on. We have community gardens, which you can see one of our gardeners there marveling at her sunflowers. We have 102 different plots that we rent out, generally fill up every year to about 60 to 75 families, with a lot of those folks renting multiple plots. And it services folks in Wrightsville, Hellam, York City, folks that don't have a yard to garden on their own, or they have a yard that's too shady for growing. And as you would expect, like most community gardens, we run the gamut of skill level of gardeners in there, from folks who have never touched the soil before and are trying it out for the first time, to folks that are veteran gardeners. And so we kind of encourage them to keep the community and community gardens, help each other, teach each other, work together. So it's a pretty good program. We also, as our name implies, do a lot of educational things at the farm. We do classes and workshops, educational lectures. This is Coach Smallwood from the Rodale Institute, who spoke over at our facility a couple months ago on his literal hike to Washington, D.C., talking about organic agriculture. And then by far the biggest focus of our mission right now is what we call our Incubator Farms program. And I'm going to talk about that a lot more in depth a little later on. So for right now, I'm going to leave it at that. We have a incubator beekeeper program as well, where we apprentice new beekeepers. And since that's pretty important, we don't have farms or food without bees or other pollinators. So that's the sort of one hat that I wear. The other hat that I wear is Sterling Farm, which is the farm that I started 4 years ago. And the farm itself is on the land of the Horn Farm Center. So I do a 2-acre organic vegetable farm in addition to my other Horn Farm position. And farming on site as part of the Incubator Farms program alongside the other farmers. And again, I'll talk more about that soon. I do a pretty wide variety of vegetables that I sell at various markets. For the past 4 years, I've been doing a CSA program. I'm actually moving away from that next season. And I sell to local restaurants, and I sell at Marietta Market is my main sort of produce market that I sell at. That's currently, well, not currently, the season's done, but we were located in Flanagan Park in Marietta in Lancaster County here Sunday mornings. And then lastly, I teach foraging classes and teach about wild foods, and I'm going to talk a little bit in a bit too about how that can factor into food inequality and access for folks. So I'm going to throw a bunch of numbers at you soon and do my best to paint a picture with those numbers. And this will be the sort of the downer section of my talk, and then we'll kind of swing up from there. But the first question I have is, how much food does York County spend on food each year? And I don't know what the Lancaster equivalent to these questions are, but I'd like to look into that. A couple years ago, our board president at the Horn Farm did a bunch of number crunching, a lot of research, and basically came up with a couple statistics here that are really kind of surprising, at least to us. And this is the numbers that we like to throw around pretty often. So York County every year spends a certain number on food each year, and that, when I say food there, I mean anything that goes in your mouth. So restaurants, grocery stores, farm markets, CSA programs, any food for the table that we spend in York. And that number is $900 million, which is a pretty astounding number. So how much of that actually goes to the local farmers? And when I say local in this context, is York County. Any guesses on how much of that 900 million, either as a number or a percentage? You want to shout out some numbers? 3%. 3%? Any, what was that? 10%? Any other guesses? 15%, so 3, 10, or 15%. Now keep in mind, York County is kind of known for agriculture. We're an agricultural county, that's our biggest industry. And we have lots and lots of prime farmland. The same would be said of Lancaster County. So of that $900 million, the amount that is actually local is $4 million, which is less than half of 1%. And so that means even in a county like ours, we're importing 99.6 or 5 or 6% of our food. And that's kind of insane. Which leads into this next number here, is that the average meal in the United States travels 1,500 to 2,500 miles to get to your plate, depending on whose numbers you're looking at. And I guarantee it's not traveling by bicycle. It looks more like this or that. And when you think of it in that way, there's a lot of oil wrapped up in the food we eat. So if we're buying the majority of our food at places that are importing it from other places, this is how it gets there. And also by boat and by plane, most likely cargo planes, cargo boats. Pretty nuts. So that's now, and on the horizon, so what we have coming down the road, to keep using that import idea. On the horizon in the next 50 years, our food demand is going to increase 70%. So whatever we're producing now, we're going to need a lot more of it over the next several decades. Meanwhile, US farmers in the next 10 years are going to decrease 50% through retirement. So we have all this farmland, but we don't have a whole lot of people that are interested in that kind of vocation to get into using it in that way, to actually feed the people that we have here. The average age of a farmer right now is 62, and that's in 1982 the average age was 50, and then I think it was 2012 when they did the last agricultural census, it had rose to 58. So in those short number of years, it went up 8 years, and about right now it's about 62. So our farmers are getting older. We have more farmers over the age of 55 than we have under the age of 30. And that, by the way, on the right-hand side is my grandfather when he was about 62, and he was a farmer. And I didn't mention this earlier, but his name was Sterling, and he was Sterling Eady. He was a lifelong York County farmer, which is how my farm got its name, Sterling Farm. So he farmed his whole life, and long past he was 62. And we have a lot of farmers right now that are definitely in their 70s and 80s that are still doing it, that are about ready to be done. So again, these are all adding up and painting sort of a bleak picture, and which leads into a bleaker picture of something that I like to affectionately call the Four Horsemen. And these are sort of like the four main issues that we face in the world right now that affect all kinds of things, including food availability, food inequality. So we have global climate change, which 97% of climate scientists believe is real. And I had someone recently in a talk I heard say that if you had 97 out of 100 doctors telling you your child was sick, would you believe them? And would you do anything about it? So we have climate change, which is affecting all manner of things, especially in the food production areas. We have peak oil, which, if those of you aren't familiar with that term, is the concept that global oil production has reached a peak and is declining. And so there is a lot of debate on peak oil as to whether the actual peak of it has happened yet or if we're kind of nearing it. But the reality is that oil is a finite substance that we use way too much of. And when you have a food system, a transportation system, an economic system that is entirely based on the availability of cheap oil, as that becomes less sure, I think it's clear what issues could arise from that. Which, like I said, economic uncertainty. You know, we've had some periods in our history of pretty strong economic depression, both recently and not so recently, and I would expect those kinds of things to continue on and off as markets change. But peak oil has a huge impact on that. And then finally, another phrase which may be new is called peak soil, and that's basically the idea of global topsoil depletion. So the farming methods that we engage mostly in right now don't really feed the soil long term, sort of short-term fixes. So, we all need, in order to live and thrive and continue, we all need clean air to breathe, clean water to drink, and clean soil to grow food in. And once we've depleted the soil to the point where we're not going to be able to extract nutrients for ourselves from it, that can be dangerous. And while there are definitely ways to farm and grow that actually leave the soil better than previous years, which is a lot of what Coach Smallwood was talking about when he was here from Rodale, that's not the majority of the kind of farming that we're seeing right now. Fun topic. So the mainstream media is kind of picking up on this too. This was just this past a week or so ago on CNBC. There's an article called "World May Not Have Enough Food by 2050." And so it used to be that these kind of articles were popping up sort of on the fringe, but the mainstream is actually reporting them now, and we can't really run away from them anymore. Yeah, this was October 15th. This is the cover of the United Nations 2013 Trade and Environment Report, and it kind of looks to me like a sort of a blockbuster movie poster. Wake up before it is too late. That's pretty out there for the United Nations. And it says underneath there, make agriculture truly sustainable now for food security in a changing climate. But this report, which you can find online on their website, is a 300-page report that basically says that the only way we're going to feed the world in the future is through small-scale organic agriculture and a lot more of it. You know, we kind of have this culture of disconnection where we're so removed from our food system that, you know, like I said, we're importing 99.5% of our food into an agricultural county. And that's pretty unheard of if you go back 100, 200 years. The year 1870, actually, 70% of the US population was directly involved in food production. So at one point in time, we were actually feeding ourselves, and now that number has gone from 70% to less than 0.5% of people growing food. And so this next slide is a quote from Ben Falk, who's a farmer and a permaculturalist up in New England. And it's a really long quote up there, and it pretty much violates every PowerPoint rule I've ever read about how many words you should have on a slide. But it's really, this kind of speaks to everything I'm thinking and talking about today. So incredible, really, that we've come to think a local foods movement based in some people farming and many people not at all is a proper substitute for a nation of gardeners. To depend upon markets for one's most essential needs is a brittle situation at best. Farming has never and will likely never replace the resilience and health aspects of most people growing a lot of their own food. As has been said before, we can't depend upon farmers to grow our food for us, a profound statement. We can't depend upon others to do our living for us, meet our basic needs for us. The small farming movement is just a bridge to what we really need. Not a million new farmers only, but a billion new gardeners. So, yeah, I love that quote. I think, so basically what we're trying to say here is that we all have to be a part of the food system and make our changes here. And here are 3 of the ways that I have put my energies into trying to address that. These are definitely not the only 3 ways. And I'm going to go through each of these with a little more detail, the first 2 a little more briefly, and the last one a little more in depth. And in the process, kind of highlighting some of the things that the Horn Farm Center and I are doing to kind of address some of these issues. So, homesteading and gardening. At one point in time, it was considered like your patriotic duty to have a garden. The Victory Garden movement in World War II was pretty amazing, and I love seeing old photos of people really kind of pushing that, and all the old patriotic posters that they would put up, almost shaming folks who didn't have gardens and weren't doing their part. And to me, that's pretty astounding when you think of where we are now, where we have municipalities that are actually banning like front yard gardens. I have friends in Marietta right now that are fighting a battle to just have 3 chickens in their backyard. And so we have gone from a point where we're encouraging everyone to grow their own food to a point where we're actually criminalizing our communities feeding themselves. So in that regard, at this point, backyard homesteading or having a garden at your own place is really super important and almost revolutionary. Not everyone can do that, so community gardens is a great other option. And there's a number of community gardens in Lancaster City too, and I think Millersville has some sort of garden set up. I think I just parked next to it today, which is pretty neat. So, you know, any possible way to grow your own food, whether it's a nice backyard or your deck or renting a space down the road that's doing that is extremely important. Mentoring others. So a lot of like food access and food inequality is that, you know, like I said before, we've become so disconnected that a lot of folks aren't growing food because they don't have the slightest idea how to do that. And so if you are a gardener and you're growing, you know, actually connect with your neighbors and talk to people in your community, help others learn how to do it, share your skills, and try to promote it from that angle. Municipal involvement is really important. You know, policies are on the books now that sometimes make this difficult to growing vegetables is one thing, but if you want to feed yourself eggs, having chickens in most towns is, hit or miss whether you're allowed to do that or not. And a lot of folks don't actually know what rules are on the books. So those things can be changed, and I've had friends who have fought that stuff and have gotten permission to grow chickens and goats and other things. But becoming an active participant in your communities is really important. Sharing the excess. Food banks need food. A lot of food banks aren't set up to take fresh produce and food, but they're changing. We have a harvest share pickup that we do at the Horn Farm where any excess food goes to the local food banks. They get either distributed as is and handed out or processed to be used in local food kitchens. So as an example of this, Havana, Cuba is phenomenal. It's got a population of 2 million. And I've never been there, but I would love to go. Population of 2 million is sort of the equivalent in our country of Houston, Texas. And I've never been to Houston, so I don't have a real good visual idea of what that's like there. But if you think 2 million is kind of right between Philadelphia, which is 1.5 million, and Chicago, which is a little over 2.5 million. So a city that size of 2 million people, they have 35,000 urban gardens and farms. And there are 2,000 neighborhoods in Havana, Cuba. And how many markets, like open air fresh food markets, do they have? They have 2,000. They have one in every neighborhood. And because of that, they are literally supplying themselves with over 50% of all the fresh produce they eat. So this isn't like a fantasy that we can actually feed ourselves. We can, it actually can be done. Lancaster City, I looked up, it's like 59,000, I think the population is. And proportionally, there's a lot more room to grow there with local foods happening in the cities. So wherever the populations are, that's where the food needs to come from. Like I was saying before with the transportation, how much oil is wrapped up in all the food we eat? How much expense is wrapped up in that? And if you can remove those things from the equation, providing for ourselves and getting freshest, healthiest food possible, that's pretty amazing. So homesteading gardening is I feel like that's pretty much a no-brainer. Grow your own food. How many people in this room have gardens? Some? Yeah. Next on the list is foraging. How many people in this room have ever done any kind of foraging? 3 or 4? 5? So what is foraging? Foraging is the act of obtaining food from the wild, food, fuel, fiber, pharmaceuticals, 4 Fs. Also called wild harvesting, wild crafting. And when we talk about foraging, it seems it's definitely sort of a fringe thing. And again, there's a lot of policies on the books that kind of outlaw harvesting wild foods from various areas. There's a lot you need to know about it. We're not going to go into like the safety precautions, the do's and don'ts right now, but it's something to learn about. I've been really into foraging for the past probably longer than I was farming, and it's pretty satisfying to be cooking up dinner that you found in the wild the same day. We all evolved as hunter-gatherers in the not so distant past. And so this was a part of all of our ancestry. But why else would you do it? I teach foraging classes at the farm on a monthly basis and do other foraging talks. And I always talk about 3 main reasons why I forage. And there's a lot more. The first one is nutrition and health. So obviously as a farming and gardening advocate, we want to grow the healthiest food possible. And the foods that we can get from our farms and gardens will never, ever compare on a nutritional level to the wild foods that grow. And there's a lot of reasons for that. These foods have basically been bred to hold nutrition and pass nutrients around in the ecosystem. And alternatively, a lot of the foods that we eat have been bred to hold for markets, or bred for taste, or bred for certain qualities, and sometimes nutrition, but the wild foods don't really follow any of our rules. They grow the way they were meant to grow and the way they've always grown. And people always ask me in my classes, wow, so you eat pretty much wild foods exclusively? And no one does that. But the important thing is that you can start adding these things to your diet. So there's a soup I made, vegetable soup with pretty standard vegetables that you would expect to find in a soup like that, but also dandelion root, plantain, yarrow, bull thistle blossoms, and I think sorrel. So it's pretty fun to go out and jazz your meal up with things that taste really good. The second reason that I always give is cost. And again, back to the idea of food inequality. This is free food that's out there. If you know where to look for it, all you really need to do is take a little time to learn and spend a little time out there. So, those are berries that you can buy at a market for about $5 a pint, or you can go pick them yourself for free. And I personally know people who have gotten into foraging because they've lost their jobs and they've been unemployed and money's tight, and their options for cheap food was either go down to Walmart and buy crap or learn something and get really super nutritious, nutrient-dense food. And then number 3 is a deep connection to nature. So I get to hang out in places like this. If you spend time in an area and learn to appreciate where you live and what the nature of that land base is, you can feel like you're actually building a relationship and a sense of place. And so reconnecting to communities and reconnecting to yourself and reconnecting to the wild places are all very much in the same vein. There's a lot of more good reasons, including physical exercise that you get from digging up deep roots and fresh air. Just as an example, this is a basket I picked in July. It took me like 25 minutes to wander around the hedgerows of the farm and come back with this. So food, medicine, tea, staghorn sumac up in the corner, white clover, yarrow, marshmallow, lemon balm, Canada thistle blossoms, chicory root, wineberries, mullein, plantain, and dandelion greens. So you can actually beef up your diet pretty heavily and make it a lot more interesting and a lot better for you at no cost at all. So I want to talk about farming a little bit and what we're doing here at the Horn Farm. And this idea of incubator farming. So it used to be getting started farming was pretty simple because your dad was a farmer, your grandfather was a farmer, and it's been passed down. You had family land once upon a time. If you look back at, like I said before, in the year 1870, when 70% of the population was growing food, it makes sense that most people were farming and they knew these skills. They could pass them down to their children. And you grew up working the field as soon as you were able to get out of the house and run around. And so you grew up with a sense of what this work was, the knowledge base, and what it meant to do. And that's not really the case anymore. So folks getting into farming now, a lot of times it skips a generation or it's an entirely new interest that pops up. My grandfather was a farmer. My parents never were. I had no interest in it as a child and didn't really get into growing food until I was probably in my 20s. So land is really expensive, especially to purchase. But even if you're leasing it, it's hard to find land that you can use to do what you want to do. It's hard learning a new skill and getting into it from that aspect. So what are the paths people can take right now to do this? A lot of folks, you can either get a job on a farm and see where it goes. You can dive right in, buy a piece of land, rent a piece of land. There's a lot of risk involved in that because you don't know really what you're doing at that point or what you want to do as a farmer and what your future could hold. So a fairly new, at least in a widespread way, concept is this idea of incubator farms. And this is an infographic that you can find online. If you just look up Incubator Farms infographic, or email me and I can send it to you. But this sort of talks about how incubators are progressing in the country. And so what is an incubator? There's all kinds of business incubators out there. And a farm incubator is just an agricultural specific incubator. And so we're basically, like the term incubator implies, we're growing farms and growing farmers and trying to make it more accessible. So when the Horn Farm started our incubator farm program, we looked at a couple existing incubators as models, one of which was right here in Pennsylvania, the Seed Farm in the Lehigh County. And currently there are only 2 in Pennsylvania that I know of, which is They and Us. And we also looked at an incubator in Vermont, which is one of the longest running incubators in the country. They've been around for in excess of 26 years at this point. I forget the actual number. But they have a nice piece of land up in Vermont, and the farming movement has been pretty healthy there. The local farming movement has been pretty healthy there for a long time. And so we started looking at what they were doing. Again, when, like I was saying before, the Horn Farm ended up with this large piece of land from the county that we could use as an education center. How can we best leverage that land? How can we best use it to better our community? And so we started looking at these programs and getting involved. And there is a national organization that's acting as kind of a linchpin between different incubators called NIFTY, kind of a nifty name. NIFTY stands for National Incubator Farms Training Initiative. And we went to a national gathering with them a couple years ago, about 3 years ago at this point. And at that point, there were 30 incubators in the entire country. When we went back the following year, there were now 111. So this idea is catching on, and the number of incubators out there are increasing. And all of these incubators operate on very different models. Some of them focus very specific populations of people, whether they're underserved communities or refugee communities that are coming to our country with lifelong skills of growing food, running farms. And so it kind of gives them a framework here in our country to do that. And others are really just servicing anybody that wants to get involved in farming. So at the Horn Farm Center, our program is really focused more towards getting more local farms going. And so how we're doing that is we're looking for folks that have a certain level of experience already. So we've been taking individuals that have been working on farms or have been pretty serious gardeners, and they want to make that next step into being a business farmer. So we're focusing on small business farms. And we also focus on sustainable methods. So all of our farmers are using organically approved farming methods. And we have 4 farmers in the program right now. And so sort of the structure of our program, I'm going to go through some of the things that we do. We basically provide a framework to jump into this position. So like I said, we provide access to a lot of things that needed to get started. We don't provide farmer training right now yet. The Horn Farm, like I said, is in our 10th anniversary, and so we're in the process right now of sort of envisioning, well, what's next? You know, we've been doing this for 10 years. We just kind of re-envisioned our strategic plan in the last 12 months and finished that, and so we're looking to go into phase 2 with a lot of these programs, and some of that may involve some training curriculums for the farmers. But we offer them affordable land. And we have this 189 acres, which is pretty unique to some of the incubators that we've worked with. And we want to leverage that land in the best way possible, and also while being good stewards of it. So we're able to rent them affordable land to get started. And that way, you can go into a program like this. You don't have to purchase land at the outset. It's very expensive. I don't recommend that to anybody who wants to get started. And we try to price it for them as affordable as possible, while at the same time making it realistic for what they can expect in the quote-unquote real world when they leave the incubator and go to farm on their own. We offer a couple different kinds of infrastructure. And so we provide them with buildings for storage. We have the smaller barn in the front there is actually what we run a farm stand out of that the farmers can use. We have a walk-in cooler for produce. We have a greenhouse they can use for starting plants, which they use for the field and also for a big plant sale we do to kind of give them some revenue up front. And we put in an irrigation system, including a pond, so that they have water to access. So they have basically everything they need to get started farming. We do equipment rentals, so we have different kinds of equipment they can rent. It's pretty cost prohibitive for a first-year farmer to go out and buy a lot of the equipment needed, even a lot of the supplies. So we try to do what we can to make it easy for them to do what they want to do. They also get to try out different kinds of equipment and see what they like. So when they do end up needing to purchase things, they can make a more informed decision. And we do tractor training and safety classes with them regarding that. We do a lot of business development. So, I always say as a farmer these days, you don't just need to know how to grow food. You also have to be an accountant, a marketing person, a mechanic, you name it. Need to know how to read the weather. So we do, all the farmers need to do a business plan. We kind of tweak that with them every year as their sort of idea of what they want to be changes. We do financial planning and financial reviews with them throughout the year. And we bring in and partner with other organizations like the Fox School of Business that we worked with and Penn State Extension, who does some training classes with us. And we try to develop that side of the farming business as well. Like I said, marketing, we work with other markets that, to try to help them. So when the farmers come on site and they grow their own food, that's their business. They get to market that in any way they choose, whether it's CSA, selling at markets, which a lot of our farmers do, or to restaurants, and that's their income. The Horn Farm doesn't take a cut of anything they make. But at the same time, we try to make connections with restaurants to kind of promote our farmers and help them and give them ideas of different marketing strategies they can do and address that side of things as well. So, a lot of people get into farming because they love the work, they love the land, they want to be outside working and doing that kind of thing. They don't get into farming because they like thinking about advertising or marketing or the business side of things. So it doesn't always come naturally. Mentorship, we get to work side by side with them and help them along the way, answer questions off the cuff. Part of me having my farm on site there is that I'm usually on site and can answer questions and help mentor them through things they need. The farmers do a lot of talking with each other, cooperative things. And that's really valuable. Farming, I've often said, is one of the most rewarding, but also one of the most loneliest jobs I've ever done. There are definitely days when you're out in the field for 10 hours by yourself in the heat trying to get stuff done and still running out of time. So it's really nice to be able to commiserate and commune with your fellow farmers that are right down the hill. And when someone's tractor breaks down and you hear cursing coming from down the hill, you can walk down, give them a hand, and have a laugh about it. And overall, so our goal is to make this like a 3 to 5 year program. So they come into our program, they take advantage of all the things we offer, farm on the land. And at the end of that 3 to 5 year period, they will have experienced a lot of things and learned and have a better sense of what kind of farmer they want to be, what kind of business they want to run, have a better idea of what kind of piece of land or what size land they're going to want, what kind of equipment they'll want. And if they need to go to a lender for a loan or to purchase land, they have a lot better leg to stand on. They can say, hey, I've been doing this for 5 years successfully. I have a business plan. I have markets set up. I have a customer base. And at that point, we can hopefully fledge them from the nest, so to speak, and make room for new farmers to come in. And one thing that the Intervale Farm in Vermont does that we like is that they have the idea of a mentor farm. So some of the incubator farms that come on site get to stay long term, become mentors for new folks coming in, and help to grow other farmers. So that's another aspect of our program that we're looking at right now. And like I said before, we have our beekeeper apprenticeship as well, which I won't go into too deep detail with, but we have a local commercial beekeeper, Mark Gingrich of Gingrich Apiaries, and he does honey at a lot of local farms and a lot of other areas around, and has contacted us originally to put hives on the property and has been partnering with us since to train more beekeepers. So he has a couple of beekeepers working with him each year, and then at the end of that year, they've gone through a whole season of beekeeping, and they take a hive home with them to their property and run their hives. And then in most cases, they come back the following year to help the next new batch of beekeepers. So it's kind of a cool rotating apprenticeship program. So that's sort of the gist of it. That's where my energies go when it comes to trying to look at food inequality and what we need to do to our food system. And going back to that Ben Falk quote, we can't depend upon others to do our living for us, meet our basic needs for us. That sentence I thought was really important. And it made me think of, well, two things. So one of the reasons I'm doing what I'm doing in farming is because I feel like I have a responsibility to do it. But it's not what I want to spend all my time doing. It's really hard work. You get really little money for it, comparatively. And like you said before, I think it's a poor substitution to have very few of us farming to feed everyone else. So what I would like to see, maybe in my lifetime or beyond, is enough people growing their own food to feed themselves or their communities that I don't have to do it anymore. So I'm working really hard to put myself out of a job, essentially. But this quote here makes me think of, I saw a sign that was posted on Facebook this week, and it was a billboard that was put on a really busy, heavy traffic road where traffic jams seem to happen all the time. And it said, it was a bicycle advocacy sign, and it said, "You're not stuck in traffic, you are traffic." And so when we're looking at our food system, like the food system is not something that we need to, that's broken and we need to fix it. It's not this entity that we engage with. Like, we are the food system. And if we reconnect ourselves to it to the point where we actually identify with it and realize that every action we do regarding what we eat, how we address food, like, we have agency to be huge game changers. So we are the food system. I'm going to open it up for questions. Check us out online, thehornfarmcenter.org. Visit us there and visit us in person. We do have a lot of events throughout the year, which you guys might be interested in. We're also always looking for volunteers. So come out and get your hands dirty. And my contact information is there at the bottom as well. So any questions, comments? It's a quiet group.
Folks, if you are on Facebook, and those of you who are my students have heard this before, go on the Center for Sustainability Facebook page at Millersville and like the page. We're going to be starting a 5 to 6 acre farm at Millersville in the spring that you might want to get involved with. And we have some other gardening opportunities with urban children in the city of Lancaster. And we hope that Mr. Darby can help us out as a consultant and friend to get this started. So if you're interested in this topic and you know that you can be a part of the solution to make a difference, like the Facebook page at least to get started. You get some updates on it as the semester progresses. John, thank you so much.
Yeah,
Let's give him
thanks.
another round of applause.
Thanks.
John, Jonathan, I read a statistic just recently that the victory farms during the Second World War produced 40% of all the food eaten in America.
Wow.
That shocked me, but 40%.
Yeah.
So we used to do that.
We used to do it, and we still can. You know, the big dogs like Monsanto and the conventional, you know, chemical companies and things like that, they really try to tell us that the only way to feed the world in 50 years is through that model. And I like to point out that that model is not feeding the world now. And it's been proven over and over again that small-scale, diversified farming has higher yields, it's better for the environment, produces healthier food, and leaves the soil better than it was found. And
more fun.
It's way more fun, yeah. So, and not everybody wants to grow food. Not everybody wants to have a garden. It's not for everyone. And if that's not you, that's great. There's plenty of good work to be done. But at the very least, like, support those that are doing it. And if you take, a statistic I read not too long ago is that if you take $10 or $15 in your food budget and you move it from what you're buying at the grocery store to what you can buy from a local producer at a farmer, the grocery store is not going to even notice the loss of that 15 bucks. But to the local grower, like, that can literally keep them in business. Like, those are what the stakes are. We don't value food in this culture to the point where food is not valued to the point where you're actually paying what it's worth. A lot of large-scale industrial farms get a lot of government subsidies in order to produce what they're producing. And I like to point out that every farm I know gets subsidies. It's just that the smaller guys like me have to provide our own. Most, if not all, the farmers I know either have a second job. I get a paycheck from the Horn Farm, which is fantastic. I don't get that from my farm, So all the farmers I know either work a second job for income or have a working spouse. Like, the days of the family farm where everyone works the farm and it's, feeds them. It feeds them, literally feeds them, but producing an income that's needed is not true anymore. So, and it's an economic issue. It's a health issue. It's an environmental issue. It's a food issue. It's a inequality and access issue. So it affects such a broad thing. So 40% in World War II, we can do better than that, I think. Yes?
So I understand there's no policy in place in terms of, the political realm. There's no policy for that. But I think we have a growing organic, movement. Like, I always buy things in Giant, and there's something called Nature's Farm.
Mm-hmm.
And I believe it's American company.
Okay.
So, I have to say, when people complain that organic is expensive, what would be your answer to that? And second thing is, what would be your suggestion, possible policy, and bigger scale to the amount of farming, small scale farming?
So I'm going to try to repeat most of that question. If I missed something, let me know. The question and comment was that there doesn't seem to be a policy addressing food right now. And a lot of folks feel that organic food is expensive. So what's my response to that? And then what's my recommendation for a policy to address that and to address promoting organic food? First of all, I say that I spend way more time wading around in mud and dirt than reading policies. So I'm not really fully aware of what all policies are and aren't out there. I do know that the USDA does have a lot of grants and are really pushing to promote small-scale farms, and there's a lot of good things on the books in that regard. So there is some positive work being done, even by the federal government and local governments that are, helping to fund various things like that. So it's not a total loss. And so with the question about organic food being expensive, I always say, because I sell at a farmer's market and my prices reflect that, and you can go into Giant or any of the other grocery stores and buy food a lot cheaper at times, and some of the same products. That's not always true. There are times when you can find things cheaper at the farmer's market, depending on what it is. And I always like to say that organic food is not expensive. It's just that the equivalence in the other food is so cheap. There are so many subsidies that when you look at the industrial system, so many of those costs are externalized. Like, small-scale growers don't have the luxury of externalizing our costs in other ways. And also, if you look at every other nation in the world, most other countries, and I don't know what the actual statistics on this are, but if you look at the percentage of an individual's income and what they spend on food is so much higher than what we spend on food. So, it's a question of values. Like, individuals can look at food and say, wow, that's really expensive. And at the same time, they've got a brand new iPhone in their pocket and all the toys that this culture tells us we need. So, hey, it doesn't have to be expensive, and it's not. And again, there are ways to make it really cheap by growing your own, or, you know, bring back the barter system, which I actually do a lot.
But the organic movement in supermarkets is a recent phenomenon, and they're charging a premium.
Yeah, there is, the word organic has that clout that, you know, especially the grocery stores are charging a premium for it. And, you know, I don't know if this is still true, but years ago, it was like if you go to the produce department in the grocery store and look at the organic produce there, it was some ridiculously high percentage, like 90 or 95% of the organic produce in grocery stores come from 2 farms in California. And it's two like mega industrial organic farms. And I would probably rather eat the local stuff from the guy down the road who's not organic than have quote unquote organic vegetables shipped the whole way across the country in a tractor trailer and delivered to my grocery store where I pay extra for it, you know. So, you know, I think you have to navigate it the best way you can and buy local, support your local farmers. You're going to get more for your dollar amount if you buy locally. You know, from the moment a piece of fruit or vegetable is harvested, it begins to lose nutrients until it reaches your mouth. And the closer you can get that to home, even if it costs you a little more, it's way more nutrient dense. You're going to get way more out of it. And then you asked what policies I would recommend to help this along. I guess I want to, you know, I don't know. I'm not a policy guy, and I don't write policies, but there has been some good work done in that regard, and I'd like to see that continue, and I'd like to see, on a local level, I'd like to see small municipalities start putting policies in place that promote their citizens growing their own food. Like, let's stop fining people because they have chickens. Let's remove the fear of beehives and stop not allowing folks to have bees because you think people are going to get stung and it's a liability. Let's bring back the family cow, you know. You know, look at Havana, Cuba, like we looked at. I'm sure that you go to any neighborhood in Havana, Cuba, and you're going to see goats, you're going to see chickens, you're going to see local, hyper-local food. And that's something we're really afraid in this culture of the dirty side of food, you know. And if you encounter it on a daily basis, it's really not that dirty. Do you have another comment?
Well, how about $100 off your property taxes if you have a garden?
Yeah. Let's
Simple, easy.
tax cuts for people growing their own food. Like, let's go back to the Victory Garden mentality where it's a public service and a patriotic service to start growing your own food. I mean, even a lot of like the organic stuff in Giant and other places, like a lot of that stuff, if you look at it, is product of China. So we're shipping organic food across the ocean, and it's, you know, it's not in the spirit of what organic was meant to be.
I know there's some like local food at the Lancaster Central Market,
Mhm.
but is there like a resource like online or something that you can like find out other places to like semi-conveniently get local foods?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I almost put it in my slideshow, and I kind of wish I had, but there's a really amazing website called localharvest.org, and you go on that website, you punch in your zip code, and it tells you all the CSAs near you, the farmers markets, the farms. You know, it spits out like a list. It's pretty great.
To your question, if you go on the same road as Sheets, like the long road, there's actually a local farmers market that's open during the day and on Sundays as well. And they have a whole bunch of stuff where you can get it for really cheap.
There's also local resources too, like the Buy Fresh, Buy Local movement is really good, and there's a York and a Lancaster Buy Fresh, Buy Local chapter that does. I know the York puts out like a local food guide. I don't know if the Lancaster Buy Fresh, Buy Local does that. I know that the SSBN does a Green Pages, which is, she's got it right back there. She'll answer all your SSBN questions, Susquehanna Sustainable Business Network. So there's some good local resources too to look up what's around here. Any others? I can talk about this stuff all day. And I didn't lose my voice. I really thought talking my head off for 45 minutes, I was going to lose my voice. So.
When I came to this area 13 years ago, part of the reason for taking the job of working in Millersville was it was sort of like the garden state, the real garden state. You know?
Yeah.
So I'm into gardening. I'll do this. When I started to dig my soil, it was really tough. It had clay and shale. Clay and shale was like concrete. And I did that for 2 years. And I was talking to one of my students in one of my classes, and she was a Church of the Brethren person who her husband had a peach farm. And I was telling her how difficult it was to get a garden going. And she said, "Oh, just buy mushroom compost and put it down and dig it into the soil." And I thought, well, that's too simple. I'll keep digging. Well, two more years later, I said, maybe she was right. And I did do that. And the soil just came alive. And I now have 800 square feet, which is half the size of this room. And I grow all my summer vegetables. And I could bottle them, freeze them, etc. for the winter. But I just couldn't be bothered. I'd rather give them away and share them with my neighbors. So you just have to make a start. Just do something. Grow something. Tomatoes are a great thing to grow because, especially those little cherry tomatoes, because they'll give you lots and lots of fruit throughout the summer.
And the other thing that brought to mind, thinking about the soil and the soil coming to life, is I do, because of my position, I get people asking me, hey, I'd like to be a farmer at some point. I'm in college right now. What kind of agricultural classes should I be taking to prepare me for that? And the one thing I always say is forget the agricultural classes, take ecology classes, because farming is subject to all ecological rules. And underneath everything is the soil. And ecology is the basis of how I run my farm. So by understanding what's in the soil and what it needs, everything comes up from there. I like to say that I grow, as a farmer, I try to grow soil, and as a byproduct, I'll get food. So science classes, ecology, understanding how your farm is a part of the ecosystem and it's not a separate entity that exists in a vacuum is really important. So. Is everyone going to go start a garden next summer now? Do we get you there?
Expect to see you all at the Millersville Farm. That's great.
Yeah. Cool. Well, thanks everyone for hanging out.
Yeah.
Yeah.